You've probably heard about the health benefits of drumming or group drumming. You may have heard claims that drumming can help boost your immune system. It can help with cancer patients. It can help do all kinds of wonderful things for your health. And a lot of those claims are a result of this study right here. So in this video, we're going to look at that study, what it was, what was involved, how they got their conclusions, if they actually reached any conclusions, and if we can really make health-based claims about group drumming at all, and what types of group drumming were done in the study, and well, you know, what some things we could say about this study would be accurate, and maybe some things we should not say because they perhaps are not going to be accurate. I'm Kalani, and this is part of our Facilitation Friday series. The goal of this video is to help you understand some of the reasoning or rationale behind some of the claims that are out there behind group drumming, some of the messaging that you might see on people's websites or in articles. A lot of this information that started with this study has been recycled, retold, revamped, and used basically as promotional material. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what happened in this study? And what were the results, and what can we really say about it that would be ethical and true, of course, and what should we maybe not say about it? So we're going to look at it right now. This study, which goes back to the early 2000s, actually this was published in January 2001 in Alternative Therapies, which is a publication. And I know that all this text is small, but the title of it is also important. The first thing you want to see is composite effects, meaning, you know, the multiple effects of group drumming music therapy. Why did they call it group drumming music therapy? We're going to get to that. On modulation, on the change of neuroendocrine immune, so immune parameters, blood work, basically changes parameters in normal subjects. So we want to acknowledge that this was a study done on blood work in normal subjects. So it doesn't have to do with cancer patients or anything like that. So if you've seen anything about people doing research with cancer patients or cancer, right off the bat we know that's not part of this study. We're going to look at what they did in the study. It had 6 groups. 2 of them were control groups, and 4 of them were what they call the study groups or the intervention groups, right? And before we get to that, we're going to get to that right in a second, but I want to bring your attention back to the context. Right here, it says context, and it says, drum circles have been part of healing rituals in many cultures throughout the world since antiquity. Okay, so right there, and look, I've talked about this many times. The word drum circle has been, what's the word I'm looking for? Commercialized or used as a branding kind of term. But right there off the bat, and I know this isn't important for the ultimate goal of this video or the ultimate discussion. Some of you might say, well, it's syntax, you know, it's just, you can call it drum circles, you can call it group drumming, you can call it whatever. But actually, that statement, drum circles have been used in healing rituals, is just not accurate for this reason. The word drum circle hasn't even been around since before 1960s. It basically is an American word to describe a group, like a spontaneous community drumming jam, or a drum jam. It could happen weekly, it could happen every month, but it's basically like free-form drumming done in a community, very open. You guys know that. And drum circle facilitators like Arthur Hull and Jim Greiner and Mickey Hart all agree that a drum circle is basically like a free-form jam session where people come together of their own free will, spontaneously creating music, not reproducing rhythms. It's not an ensemble. It's not composed. It's not a game that people play. It's not a class. It's just a jam. And that's what a drum circle is. So to imply that people were doing that in healing rituals since the beginning of time is just inaccurate. So I have concerns about that. Again, that doesn't really change the contents of the study. The study's the study. We're going to get to that, but that's a little bit of a red flag for me right off the bat. Anyway, let's move on and look at the different groups. And what they did in this study is there were two control groups. The control groups were a listening group and a reading group. Like the first group was basically reading magazines. So they had one group doing nothing. These are control groups, right? So these are the groups that they have to say, okay, if we're going to do the intervention stuff over here, let's have some other people basically not doing anything so we can compare the two and see if the interventions actually have an effect. There were two control groups. One, as I mentioned, was listening. What were they listening to? They were listening to, according to this study, drumming music. All right, we don't know exactly what, but they were listening to some drumming music. The other group was relaxing, just reading magazines or doing whatever. But they weren't doing anything else. They weren't doing any exercise. They didn't have anything to eat or drink. And these were all randomly selected out of about 111, I believe, participants. So there were about, 10 to 15 participants in each group. All right, what were the groups that were doing interventions? There were 4 of them, so let's look at those. So in the first group, they're calling that basic drumming, and that was group drumming facilitated by a community-based drumming instructor, approximately 50% instruction and 50% activity. So that group was probably like an instruction, like a class, right? 50% talking, 50% drumming. You're not drumming a lot, but you're doing some drumming. And these are all, by the way, everybody in this whole study had not drummed recently, and they were not experienced in drumming. They were what they called typical subjects from the community. These are not people that normally would drum. This is kind of a novel experience for them. The next group, the second group, was called impact drumming. And that's described as group drumming facilitated by a community-based drumming instructor, approximately 20% instruction and 80% activity. Okay, so in that group, you could think of that probably more like a typical drum circle, a little bit of instruction just to give people, some idea of what to do. I mean, they haven't done it before, so they probably needed a little instruction. And then they spent most of the time, 80% of the time, playing. So I guess that's why they call it impact drumming. I'm not sure what impact drumming is. Technically, it's not really a term that we use. None of us say, I'm going to go into my impact drumming group. However, there is some drumming in gyms now, so maybe that relates to that. The third group was shamanic drumming, and it says a group drumming facilitated using a shamanic approach. All right, so we don't know much about that. There's lots of different approaches to shaman, and even the word shamanic or shaman is a little bit overused, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes misused. We're not sure what they were doing in that group. I'm assuming it would be something repetitive, meditative, maybe somewhat passive, maybe because there's not a lot of talking, not a lot of changing. It's probably kind of staying the same. I don't know. I could find out, because in the fourth group, which they called the composite drumming group, the composite drumming group was facilitated by a music therapist, and who was actually chosen to lead the ultimate intervention that they really focused on. And I know I can find out what happened because he's a friend of mine. He's a colleague, Mike Marcinetti, and he's a percussionist and a board-certified music therapist with a lot of experience leading groups and a lot of experience working with all kinds of different populations. So Mike is the person who led the actual composite drumming group session or intervention for the study. And that, I think, is important. Let's see what they did in that group, the group that actually had more of a benefit than the other groups. So, experimental protocol. Each experimental group was facilitated by a music therapist or clinician with drumming experience. After brief introductions, subjects were given shaker eggs, plastic eggs containing sand or gravel, to establish an initial sense of teamwork and camaraderie in a lighthearted manner. The facilitator instructed the subjects to pass the shaker eggs hand to hand from individual to individual. The speed of transfer progressively accelerated to the point that the participants could not maintain the pace. Eggs were dropped, and a light-hearted response ensued, as you would imagine. So essentially what they did, the first thing they did in the experimental group was to do a rock passing game. These kind of games are very common with playground children's games, elementary school music activities, lots of rock passing games, lots of things where people will pass, things like egg shakers or other items around in a circle. And maybe you've seen the cup pass game. That's similar. That's in the same genre. But basically passing the eggs from person to person, taking an egg out of your hand, putting it in your neighbor's hand, and then doing that and speeding up until you can't maintain it. And, a lighthearted, what did it say? A lighthearted response ensued. Basically laughter. All right, so fun. Okay, so we're starting off with something fun. And then what do we do after that? Let's see. Then, after the egg pass, subjects were then instructed to choose a hand drum from a wide selection of instruments stored in an adjacent area. Okay, so they got a drum, and then the facilitator provided brief percussion instructions. Each subject was then asked to tap out a simple rhythm, basically a self-designed rhythm consistent with the number of syllables in their first and last name. And then they played their rhythm with the other members, and then the facilitator varied the beat and the tempo for the group, and that lasted for approximately 20 minutes. And then the facilitator modulated the tempo and the dynamics using musical facilitation techniques, what we in music therapy call clinical improvisation techniques. So they had a jam based on their names and the syllables in their names. Like, for example, my name's Kalani Das, so I might play Kalani Das, Kalani Das, and I guess if your name is Jim, then you have a really short rhythm. So fun, right? Simple. Again, something very much akin to what we might do in an elementary school music class, right? Elementary drumming. Kindergarten even. I remember doing these kind of things when I was in kindergarten. So super easy. I think that's probably important, right? Low stress. Non-intimidating. All right, let's see what they did after that. So now we have two things they did. They did the egg shaker pass, the egg pass, and they did easy rhythms, community rhythms based on their names, and they got to choose their own instrument. So they choose something they're comfortable with. What did they do next? Okay, next, they were led with the assistance of one of the center's clinical staff, the facilitator then led the guided imagery phase of the drumming session. 2 descriptive stories were told, each approximately 15 minutes, while members of the group played their drums with a rhythm, tempo, and volume, along with the facilitator in a manner that matched the spoken imagery. Subjects were allowed to keep their eyes open or closed. The entire percussion session lasted an hour. All right, so that was the remainder of the session. So maybe, let's say, 10 minutes for the egg pass total, and then getting the drums, and then 20 minutes of the rhythm, also shaped by the music therapist in this case, and then 2 guided imagery interventions. And again, we don't know the exact subject matter. I believe, having spoken with Mike about it, that it was kind of like a journey, like you're going up a river, and then you go up to a mountain, and it's kind of like we're all going together, and there's a feeling of togetherness and teamwork and camaraderie and visualization. So let's review. And then after that, they did their blood sample. So that was the whole session. So shaker pass, fun, laughter, something simple based on your name, play the rhythm, and then a couple story-based things. And I think, again, these are sort of things that we would do in a music education classroom, elementary, elementary school, basically. We do stories with sound effects, tell the story, play along with guidance from the facilitator. And I think, to me, this really speaks to the skills of the facilitator. And of course, when you have somebody who's got a lot of experience and training, and they know how to do that, they know how to guide people, you could expect a good outcome, right? These are people that are used to working with groups of people and very much tuned into the mood and the feelings and the indicators, and to make it easy and to make it fun. Okay, so those were all the interventions, and the one that we just went through had at least 4 different parts, really 3 main parts. So humor, the egg shaker pass, but let's just say that's humor. We have the name part, which is about community and teamwork, and also acknowledging people's self, so there's a kind of validation component there. And then we have the guided imagery, which again is very gentle, and you're following along, kind of just very gentle, and maybe closing your eyes too could bring you into a nice space and improve your sense of security and just being held within the music. And all of those things add up to some really important psychosocial and psycho-emotional drivers, right, or components, and I think that's important. Now, we're going to skip to the end and look at the conclusion, some of the results. It did turn out that, I'm not going to show you the paper right now, but you can get it and download it, look at it in particular. I mean, it's just stuff like, there's some graphs here, you can look at all this stuff. But I wanted to go to the summary, and I'll read some of these things here. This is the summary. So what it says here is that group drumming music therapy carried out according to this protocol and using a specific approach for facilitating sessions that emphasize camaraderie, group acceptance, light-hearted participation, and non-judgmental performance appears to attenuate and or reverse specific neuroendocrine and neuroimmune patterns of modulation associated with the classic stress response. All right, so of course that's, academic speak for. It seems that if you facilitate a session that has some of these components, like I mentioned, humor, inclusiveness, the lightheartedness, the kind of making it easy for people. It seems that if you do all that you will have results that are, in this case, it says the reverse of the stress response, which is good, right? We don't want to feel stressed. So the reverse of the stress would be joy, happiness, fun, uplifting. And that seems to be what really made the difference in this case. But let's go on and see what they say about what we can say about, or what conclusions we can really draw from this study. All right, so we're going to go on here, and here it says, although these data demonstrate statistically significant modulation of specific parameters, this study, an initial single trial design, represents only the first step in determining the ultimate value of group drumming as a wellness or therapeutic intervention. Future studies specifically addressing these issues are required before suggesting group drumming as a potential treatment strategy for individuals facing the challenges of illness. And then down here, further investigation is needed to elucidate precise mechanisms, blah, 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 for individuals with chronic illness. So, of course, because this study was done with typical subjects, normal subjects, nothing wrong with them, we wouldn't want to presume that anything done here would impact somebody that was, for example, suffering or had cancer or any other kind of illness. So that's what it says here. It also says that further research is needed to be able to make any claims. Basically, it's saying that this is promising. These results are promising. And why shouldn't they be, right? If you give people a safe, supportive space to have fun, to connect with each other, to validate them, give them a really nice, gentle experience. And remember, these are not drummers. These are people who have not drummed before. So it's not surprising, really, that the impact drumming, the doing 80% drumming, maybe 50 minutes out of an hour or 45 minutes out of an hour, is pretty, that's a pretty big jump for most people. And they may have felt a little anxiety or stress just about, like, what am I doing? I don't know what to do. It might have been a little uncomfortable for them. That's a lot of drumming for people that don't drum. And even the drumming instruction part, we all know that drumming is not that easy. Keeping rhythms together, producing specific patterns, it's just not easy, despite some of the messaging out there about how easy drumming is. I think if you're a student of drumming, if you've done much drumming and you've done some group drumming, you quickly realize that it's just not that easy. Is it fun? Sure. Is it accessible? Sure. But it's not easy to pull off well. So maybe the drum class model, the drumming instruction, learning different patterns and executing them, playing them, I could see where that would be a little stressful. And then as far as the shamanic drumming, I don't know. We don't know what really happened in that. I would guess that if a meditative shamanic drumming intervention was done in a certain way, that it would also have really similar health benefits. But let's look at the intervention group for a second and just acknowledge that there were a couple unique factors to that group. One is it was led by a music therapist. It says right on the front of the study, group drumming music therapy. So the effects of group drumming music therapy. So the music therapist probably had a big impact because of his or her personal facilitation styles and his skills in leading and facilitating a group of people through, an intervention. Secondly, there were things in there that weren't existing outside, that weren't existing in the other studies, and there were things that have also been shown to have benefits with regard to immune system, specifically humor. We know that laughter and humor help boost immune systems. There have been studies on that. We know that guided imagery can help boost people's immune systems and reduce stress and anxiety. There have been studies on that. So combining those other things with some gentle, very easy, achievable music making seems to be a winning combination. Now, before we wrap up, I want to acknowledge that there are lots and lots of different types of facilitators, people facilitating different things out there, right? There's drum lessons, there's drum ensembles, there's drum circles, there's community ritual style, celebrations and commemorations, all sorts of celebrations that are done with drumming, with a drummer. Sometimes it's a drummer that has a lot of experience. Sometimes it's somebody with a little bit of experience. And then there's music therapy, which involves a highly trained person. There's all sorts of different kinds of experiences being done out there that can look similar. Group drumming, like I said, that's the huge umbrella category, group drumming. But is it a drum class? Is it a drum circle? Is it music therapy? Is it something else? That's something that we have to know in order to make a claim about what's happening. We know in this case, it was a very specific set of, they call it a protocol. What is a protocol? A protocol is a specific procedure, right? A procedure is a series of steps. A protocol says these need to be followed specifically in this order, or it's not going to work, right? I don't know about that. I don't know about that claim. I think in my experience, and as a music therapist and as a drummer and as somebody who's facilitated lots of experiences for people, I'm not sure that it's super important what the order is. I think as long as there's inclusiveness, if there's some humor, if there's some lightheartedness, if there's opportunities to make choices, to participate to the degree that you're comfortable, I think all of those things will contribute equally, and perhaps you can find out ways of reordering those things to maybe help people feel even better. But what we can say is from this study is that with the right training and experience of the facilitator, and bringing in certain elements that frankly are not specifically drumming. Drumming doesn't own humor, drumming doesn't own guided imagery. But if you bring those elements into a drumming session, that it can improve the chances that a, quote, group drumming session, can be emotionally, psychologically, and immunologically beneficial for people. All right. We probably cannot say that just group drumming, like if you just use the term drum circle, because obviously this was not a drum circle that they did, all right? So it was very specific, had very specific things happening, so it would not be accurate to say any kind of group drumming is going to boost your immune system, right? Also, before we go, I want to point out that while it does say statistically significant in the study, if you understand what that means in terms of a study, it just means that you can basically rule out chance. That something that is statistically significant can still be very, very tiny. It can be a very, very tiny change. So I have seen some people make claims that there was a significant improvement. They dropped the word statistically, which kind of changes the implied meaning. When you think about a significant improvement in something, you're thinking, oh, that's like 20, 30%. When in fact, statistically significant can just be a change of like 0.1% or something like that. Just very small. And I don't mean to discount the benefits or the results of the study, but I just want to make that point that it's not the same thing as saying significant changes. Other questions we can ask ourselves is, okay, we did this drumming intervention. It seemed to help lower the stress response, but how much does it lower the stress response as opposed to saying just doing humor by itself or just doing guided imagery by itself? Was the drumming, what effect did the drumming have? Because we know the drumming in the other sessions apparently did not produce desirable results, so we needed to add those other elements to the drumming. The question then would be, what effect does the drumming have? Is the drumming actually needed, or can we just focus on the humor and the guided imagery? And maybe do other games. Maybe it was the kind of game things and the inclusiveness and the acknowledging people's names and having them play together, having them do something together. Maybe singing would be equally as potent in terms of boosting an immune response. We don't know. I mean, these are things that need to be studied. I think at this point, though, we could fairly say that drumming can be an effective, community-based, inclusive intervention that can help people by elevating their mood, giving them a little vacation, kind of like a spa experience, a little break from life that can occupy their minds with something good, some guided imagery thrown in there, never hurts. That could be a good thing. And then it's just something fun and relaxing to do for typical people. Again, since we haven't done studies with cancer or anything like that, we just don't know what the effects could be. I think the reason people have made a connection with cancer patients or cancer is because of the connection of the NK cell, the natural killer cells, which in the study or which in talks, people have said, oh yeah, the natural killer cells are the same cells that can fight cancer. Well, of course they are, because they're part of your immune system. NK cells fight everything. They're just like white blood cells. I mean, if something invades your body, they're going to jump into action. So it's not about cancer. It's just that that's part of your immune system. So you could, you don't want to make claims about cancer. You might as well make claims about anything that could be causing, disease. So it's not that drumming has anything to do with, or this study has anything to do specifically with cancer. It's just natural killer cells are part of your immune system. They fight everything that needs fighting. So cancer and everything else. So nothing specific about cancer. Personally, I would caution anybody to make any claims like that. It sounds like if you say drumming helps with cancer patients or there was a study done with cancer patients, no, that was definitely not part of this. In the future, there could be more studies. Other questions I have would be, does it matter if it's a music therapist or not? And again, if you take away some of the elements or switch them around, change the order, does it need to be a protocol? In other words, does it need to be followed very strict? I know friends that do this, have been trained in this, and they say that they change it all the time. And they add different things, they take stuff out, they change it around because they feel like it makes that particular group better. You know, it addresses the needs better. And I agree with that. You know, I know this is a medical model, but frankly, you know, the idea that just because something worked once, that it is the way to do it and you shouldn't change anything, I get that why you would want to do that in medicine, but the fact is that music is a humanity. Arts are humanity. It's about people. So a lot of what we do, I don't speak for myself right now, a lot of what I do as a drummer and music therapist and facilitator is I read the room. You know, I get to know who I'm working with, and I will make decisions moment to moment based on what I feel are the needs and the capacities of the participants in that moment. Because this is a human experience. It's not a medical procedure. It's very much a human experience, and we need to be responsive. It's just like a conversation. You don't plan out what you're going to say. Well, I mean, sometimes we do. But it never goes that way, right? Whenever you have a conversation, it's dynamic, things change, things come in, and you make changes in the moment to accommodate what's happening and to do the best job you can in the moment. So there's some other issues with the protocol aspect of it. But now you know, hopefully, what the study was, what happened, what was being compared to what the results were, what claims you could make or not based on all of that information. So did I reach the goal of the video? I hope so. Did I help you get a little more perspective on that study? Yeah, I hope I did. Anyway, if you'd like to leave your comments, helpful and kind comments below, please do. If you'd like to connect with me more, you can do that at patreon.com/Kalani. I will leave a copy of this PDF over there as well as a link below to see where you can get that directly. Keep making music, keep doing good work, keep asking important questions. I'll see y'all soon.